And welcome to my session. Hello and welcome to my session. I'm indeed privileged to be a part of the 29th Korea TESOL International Conference 2022 on an online mode, an experience of a lifetime. In today's session, in the Korean conference, I have opted for a theme which I loved and was very close to my heart. More than words, teaching for a better world. With respect to this, the title of my paper today is The Pedagogy of Compassion and Service Learning. Welcome, and I am Heemal, Handoo, Bhat, and I'm heading an organization in India, Delhi. Ladies and gentlemen, compassion. But these few years, education has been tough, and it gets its purpose when we nurture human values of warm-heartedness, of compassion, focusing on transforming an individual from a human being to the state of being human. Now, isn't that a beautiful thing? You know, when we talk about doing some research in this area, what we did was we tried to find different approaches that the teachers could use and practice the pedagogy of compassion, which found solace in the remote learning period of the pandemic. And it came to everyone's rescue during these very stressful circumstances born out of unprecedented times. The research that I went through suggests various ways in which we can promote independent learning and a culture of inclusivity to develop humane qualities in students during the pandemic. Compassion. Compassion is to feel together, how you can work together, how empathy and how action, when they come together, there is compassion. In my experiences for this paper, what we talked about is how students developed a mindset for service learning. What are the things that we had to do to make it possible, to bring about tenacity and resilience, which the students imbibed continuously, consistently during these pandemic times, while making a worthy connection with all of them. Some of the things that we worked on is what I'll be sharing. But before that, let's share something else. The one activity which was a very popular one with our children was Let's Share the Activity, wherein we would ask the children to share one interesting highlight of yesterday. I wish we had an interactive conference situation where I could ask you to share this interesting highlight of yesterday. When you make them express what was beautiful is what we are talking about, just like a rose. But then no roses are really roses without thorns, are they? So what went wrong yesterday, or maybe day before yesterday? What was it that really didn't allow them to do and have a beautiful experience? And what are you looking forward to do? That is, you reflect on what went wrong and then you work on it. And that's how you'll prepare to bloom again, just like a bud does. Now, this is a small activity I started with here today, though we are not in that kind of a mode, but something that you can take away from my session and try in your own space. This can be done even in an offline mode. Ladies and gentlemen, talking about the pedagogy of compassion, what are some of the essential elements of compassion? So I put in this very small treat, okay, a small mnemonic. How did we do it? First was trust. The second was respect for everyone. Even in these times, we needed to do that. We needed to have trust, how everybody is going to go about teaching. We needed to develop and enhance, if everybody is already developed in that area, empathy, appreciation for the fact of what you already have. Appreciate others, appreciate what you have, appreciate that you are, appreciate. And that is thoughtfulness as well. A treat, some of the basic elements, I believe, for compassion in anybody. We all talk about compassion and being compassionate towards others and the pedagogy of compassion. But the first part of the pedagogy of compassion is self-compassion. Now, this might not be a very familiar thing for you, but in self-compassion, there are three things that I would discuss. If you are not self-compassionate, if you don't have compassion for your own self, how can you transfer anything to the other? How can you transact that in the class? So recognizing your own strengths, recognizing your own weaknesses, not being judgmental over anyone is what mindfulness would all be about. How you would not overreact to a situation or to a person is also mindfulness. That is self-compassion, knowing your own self, being mindful of what you're doing. The second thing is we talk about acts of kindness, but have you ever had acts of self-kindness? Not really, not the much I've heard about. How are you being supportive towards your own self? Are you being too harsh to yourself? Are you being too self-critical? No, that is being kind to your own self. So you need to make sure that you aren't really too critical of your own self, and there is compassion towards your own self as well. The third point which I introduced to you is connectedness. When I'm talking about connectedness, I'm trying to tell you something like everyone makes mistakes. Nobody is perfect. So let's not take the stress of being perfect all the time. Let's understand all of us are facing difficulties. All of us are having tough times, and we are going to learn how to do it. Remain connected and don't be a perfectionist every time. Once in a while is okay. Some principles of compassion that I would share with you. First, practice open-mindedness. Be broad-minded. Make sure that you are flexible. Make sure that you treat everyone with respect. And there is nothing learning from the situations that you're going through. You are learning from the pandemic. Aren't we taking away so many learnings from these 2 years? Haven't we changed? Aren't we having a humanitarian approach? Now, in this whole process, you need to cultivate cohesiveness. And that is important because there are a lot of things that are unsaid, and there are a lot of opportunities that you get to express. Are you using those opportunities? Are you using those opportunities and adversities and making use of them? Use personal attention to the children, and that will help you in the long run. When I talk about whether there is a need for compassion in students, have you ever thought, why do they need it? Do they need it at all? Yes, they do, whether they are on an online mode or an offline. Even during the online learning time, we had a lot of bullying that was happening in the classroom situation on the screen. So there were students who were not allowing the others to speak. There were students who would carry on the bullying even after the classroom sessions. Have you realized that the family atmosphere wasn't exactly a perfect one? It was a disturbed one. Have you realized under those circumstances how the children were behaving and what issues they must have had? From an online class, it is very difficult to make out what they are going through. And this could be the result of their lower grades. Your academic grades are going bad because of that. So there is a socio-economic gap that got created during this pandemic times. How did we deal with it? Were we compassionate? Did we enhance compassion towards them? Yes, we did. In India, we have an economically weaker section whom we support, but not everyone has a device to their own selves during the pandemic times. So if there is a family that has 4, there are 2 people who are going to work, there are 2 more who are siblings and are into the online process, they have only 1 device, only 1 phone. So how does that work for the whole family? So the economic divide has only widened. How did we support them? In our school, that is Hansraj Model School, Punjabi Bagh in Delhi, India, what we did was every family has more than 1 telephone. The ones who are the elite ones, because they go on for a new phone and the old one remains in the house. So what we did was during these times, our whole team went about looking for phones and sharing our old phones with the ones in need. And that's how we brought in compassion from the grassroots level. There are a lot of family expectations that the children have to face. All the unfulfilled dreams of the parents have to be fulfilled by the children. I guess that's the same scenario whether in Korea or in India or the world over. They are really having to bear with the brunt of unfulfilled desires and wishes and things that the parents couldn't do in their youth. But we are all forgetting the physiological needs of the children. At that age, how much can they do? At that time in the pandemic, how much could they actually do? We need to keep these things in mind because these have become huge stresses on the children. And it is very difficult to juggle with all the skills that they have. And this has only resulted in a lack of competencies in our children. We really didn't give them a chance to grow, did we? We pushed all our desires and our dreams onto the children. So how did we manage to work on that? What are the things that we did to enhance the compassion in students? Well, we tried a few things and it worked for them. I'm just sharing here some of them with you. Some may work for you. It's not a set formula, but some may work for you. It depends on the regional differences that we have, the state, the country, how you go about it. There is no structured formula or an equation I can provide. I can only share what worked. For example, making peer buddies in the class worked well for us. For example, asking for volunteers to come forward and share what was done in the class for those who missed the class due to whatever reasons is what we worked on, and that's what worked for us. So the team building games that we had produced and introduced and initiated worked for us. We promoted cooperative learning. All these activities of team building and volunteering and peer buddies all worked for cooperative learning, and that really worked for us. So when a child is volunteering to do something after the school timing off the screen, on the screen rather, then what happens is they're volunteering to teach them what happened in the class. These are all acts of kindness. What we did was acknowledge each act of kindness. That worked for us. So we shared experiences. So in an offline mode, we had the small little boxes wherein they would share experiences. But now on the online mode, we had a email ID on which they could share their experiences, and we would share these inspiring stories with all of them. The experiences and the inspiring stories, an amalgamation of the same. Then we learned to give them lessons from the past, what they have learned. We brainstormed on a lot of things, real life incidents, natural calamities, we discussed, we talked about, we practiced meditation, we promoted a lot of positive and progressive involvement of the students. Now, all these projects could not have been done if the teachers that we had were not compassionate. The pedagogy of compassion talks about great teachers, and I believe sharing 5 examples of great teachers that we have had in history. His Excellency Dalai Lama, Confucius, and Lord Jesus. Aristotle, if you can recognize that, we quote him all the day. And then, of course, Lord Buddha, whose tenets we have all been following. There are a lot of similarities when we talk about compassion. When we talk about projects on compassion and great teachers, nature is a great teacher. I remember the Korean festival, the Cherry Blossom Festival of Korea, which talks about compassion towards nature, compassion towards trees. The compassion cannot be just for students. It can involve anybody and everybody. Compassion and how it can be used as a classroom management tool is something I need to share with you. You could share your share and concern towards the students. You could make them aware of their own set of complications and what they're having. You could consider each day as a clean state for a fresh beginning. So black slate, and every day is a beautiful day to begin with. Then you could teach them to be forgiving, how to practice forgiveness. And that is a very big thing. Once you forgive somebody, you are already showing your compassion towards them. So we had small little activities which would actually initiate or a first step towards making them compassionate. Then you have to stay invested in the future of students. You have to make sure you draw a thin line between compassion and being, friendship, the relationship that the teachers have with the students, and where to draw a line, being compassionate and being friends with them. A lot of things happen in a classroom situation, but as a teacher, You can't hold grudges against the students. That wouldn't be teacherish, would it? Or teacher-like. So you need to forgive them because that's what we are saying to them. And forgiveness should start from the teachers. You are the role models. Never hold any grudges against any students. Avoid discussing any behavioral issues in a public scenario or a setting or a classroom. Call them aside. Call them to your room. Call them to a staff room. Tell them what can be done better. Support students in a non-classroom environment. I think they tend to identify and learn better in that. Encourage them to develop, socio-emotional competencies. Finally, this is going to hold them in good stead in the future. So let me introduce the second component of the pedagogy of compassion, that is service learning. What is service learning? People ask me this sometimes. Service learning is experiential learning, which is a very popular pedagogy right now. Learning by reaching out, the relationship that you build, a meaningful service that you talk about, bringing course content into the experience. You don't have to go separate ways. And all said and done, reflecting on the action that you have taken. But then, what is service learning not about? I think that is also important to share because I have seen people get confused when I talk about service learning. Service learning is not about voluntary service. It is not about social service, and it is definitely not about just a survey or a field trip or a community outreach program, because there the beneficiary is only the recipient. And I'm not talking about only one-sided recipient. I'm going to talk about service learning, wherein the service learning is based on a well-defined learning goals. The well-defined goals and objectives which support learning as well as community service goals. So it is a vocational skill for the benefit of the community. And yes, in many communities and countries across the world, we have planned assessment of service learning. Yes, it is experiential, but it can also be assessed. Assessment is important in some areas, in some countries, it is not when it comes to service learning. Measurable. Are they measurable? Yes, they are measurable if you have the right parameters. So this is what it actually is. It focuses on learning and meeting service goals as well. So here, the provider and the recipient both are benefited. Isn't that beautiful? Then what are the benefits of service learning? Why should we even have this? Why should we promote this with students? We need to do it because it enhances academic knowledge. It improves your interpersonal skills. It brings in cooperative learning, enhances your communication skills. There is a lot of interpersonal growth when you are using service learning. Your confidence is built. There are virtues of empathy that are enhanced, virtues of compassion that are built. Your civic engagement skills are enhanced. Do you need more? There is more commitment towards what you're doing. And the most important, which is getting a lot of weightage across the academics, are self-reflection, which we need to bring in into the children. So what are some of the key components of service learning? Some of the key components I am not going to discuss. I've already told you it's about preparing and designing and implementing and then assessing them. I discussed that in brief, but what I will discuss with you definitely are the challenges for the educators. During this whole thing, what were some of the challenges we as educators faced? The toughest one is the last one, but the first one is integrating our experiences into it. We didn't have much control in a remote learning mode. And half the day we were taking classes, the rest half we were planning for the next day. So it was very time consuming, exhausting, 24/7. The educators were working online. And the most challenging of all was to assess them on an online mode, which would be fair, reliable, and it would have good validity. So this was one of the greatest challenges. These were some of the challenges. But then we worked on some strategies that I would like to share with you. One thing that we did to overcome these challenges was a lot of careful planning, preparation of goals and outcomes. We worked on clear-cut instructions on the goals of every project. We made sure that the students identify the potential community partners with whom they could work at various stages of the project. Then we talked about unexpected experiences that would happen, those teachable moments that happen when we are doing this. So we used service learning to enhance the course content rather than to replace the course content. This is what worked. These are some of the strategies that work for us. Before I close my presentation, it would be unfair if I did not discuss on the other side, that is the student side, what were the challenges? They weren't in a comfortable seat. They had challenges during the pandemic as well, during their learning experiences as well. The first thing on our survey that we found was time constraints. They had to do everything in the household because they were closed down. There were no people, support people who were coming in. So they had time constraints. There were classes going on. They had to help. They had to eat. There was screen time. One sibling to another sibling to the parent having to share the same device, time constraint. The second thing was dissatisfaction with the work. They weren't really happy with an online class. Offline classes were much better. They could socialize, they could speak to their friends. And I think you must have seen the family restrictions. How can you have a class under the scrutiny of parents, grandparents, siblings? How can be your own self during these times? These were some of the challenges that the students shared with us. We suggested some ways to overcome these challenges to the children. We told them to check on we would check them on a regular basis to ensure that all the children are adhering to the norms of the classes and the projects. We would make sure that there is regular evaluation on the service learning project. We would provide flexibility to the students so that they can, communicate with and provide and, cooperate learning, collaborate learning with their community partners. So all in all, we would encourage them to try out new things. Now, all said and done, the pedagogy of compassion is here to stay, at least for the next few years. It'll take us a little time to come back into normalcy. Just getting onto the offline mode is not normalcy. There are huge learning gaps. There are huge behavioral gaps. There are huge things that have happened during these 2 years. And compassion is something that could bridge the gap for these children. Kindness in words creates confidence. Kindness in thinking creates profoundness. Kindness in giving creates love. Let's try to give more and more. Let's bring pedagogy of compassion into our classes and make the learners more comfortable. Let's give them some time. Thank you for being here for my session. It was a pleasure having you all here. Namaste, as we say in India.